At exactly 6 p.m. on May 20th, 2025, inside the Huntsville unit in Texas prison, officials began the lethal injection procedure for inmate Matthew Lee Johnson. He had spent the past 13 years on death row awaiting the final outcome of a crime that had shocked an entire community. Johnson, now 49 years old, had been convicted of capital murder in 2013 for a deadly act committed on a quiet Sunday morning in Garland, Texas. That day, 76-year-old Nancy Harris was doused in lighter fluid and set on fire during a convenience store robbery. She died 5 days later from severe burns. As the execution chamber filled with silence, Matthew Johnson lay strapped to the gurney, surrounded by guards, medical personnel, and witnesses, including members of the victim's family. Under Texas law, he was not allowed a special last meal. Like all other inmates, he was served the standard prison fare. The clock on the wall ticked slowly past 6:53 p.m. That was when Johnson was pronounced dead. His execution marked the end of a legal process that had stretched over a decade, but for many, the memory of what happened 13 years earlier had never faded. It was just after 7 a.m. on Sunday, May 20th, 2012 in Garland, Texas. At the Whip Inn convenience store, 76-year-old Nancy Harris was starting another quiet morning shift. She had unlocked the front door and begun her daily routine, mopping the floor, checking the register, and preparing for the day ahead. Nancy was a familiar face in the neighborhood. For over a decade, she had worked at the same store just a short walk from her home. Locals knew her as friendly, dependable, and sharp. That morning, she was alone. Around 7:15 a.m., a man walked through the front door. It was Matthew Lee Johnson. He wasn't there to buy anything. Johnson carried a plastic bottle filled with lighter fluid and had a cigarette lighter tucked in his pocket. Without saying a word, he walked past the snacks and soft drinks, heading straight for the register. Nancy followed him calmly, telling him that customers weren't allowed behind the counter. He didn't stop. Instead, Johnson raised the bottle and began pouring lighter fluid directly onto her head and upper body. Then he ordered her to open the cash register. Nancy complied. Surveillance footage later showed Johnson grabbing cigarettes, cash, and even slipping her ring off her finger, though he would later claim he didn't remember taking it. But even after he got what he wanted, he didn't leave. Standing just inches from her, Johnson pulled out the lighter and flicked it once. No flame. He flicked it again. Still nothing. The third time, the flame caught. And because her clothes were already soaked in flammable liquid, Nancy Harris instantly ignited. She burst into flames. Johnson didn't react. He didn't try to stop it. He didn't call for help. Instead, he turned, walked calmly toward the exit, and just before walking out, grabbed a piece of candy from a display near the door. He left her burning behind the counter. As flames engulfed her body, Nancy Harris did not collapse. Instead, she fought. In a desperate attempt to extinguish the fire, she rushed to the store sink, splashing water onto her burning clothes. The flames clung to her. She ripped off her shirt and dropped it to the floor, but the fire had already spread. Her bra continued to burn, and as she bent over the sink again, the flaming shirt on the floor ignited her pants. Now her lower body was on fire too. Still conscious and still determined to survive, Nancy stumbled to the front of the store. Smoke trailed behind her. She shoved open the doors and collapsed onto the pavement outside, screaming for help. Two nearby Garland police officers, Billy Coffey and Anthony Simon, had just pulled into the parking lot after seeing smoke through the windows. As they arrived, they saw Nancy emerge, her body engulfed in flames. Officer Coffey grabbed a fire extinguisher from his patrol car and ran toward her without hesitation. He sprayed her down as quickly as he could, fighting the fire still clinging to her skin. Officer Simon tried to keep her alert. When the flames were finally out, Nancy was still alive. Badly burned but able to speak, she told the officers everything. A man had robbed her. He poured something on her. He lit her on fire. She described him as a heavy-set black male wearing a t-shirt and blue jeans. Inside the store, investigators confirmed the register had been emptied. The store manager later said it contained around $80 in cash and coins. That was what Nancy's life had been traded for: cigarettes, a small amount of money, and a piece of candy. Paramedic William Cruz arrived shortly after. A police officer waved him over to where Nancy lay on the pavement. Her face, arms, stomach, and legs were covered in burns, some so deep they destroyed all layers of skin. Despite her injuries, Nancy remained conscious. As Cruz began treatment, she whispered words that would haunt him for years.
Help me! Help me! Help me!
Then again.
Help me, please!
She wasn't just scared, she understood how badly she was injured. After setting Nancy Harris on fire and walking out of the store, Matthew Lee Johnson disappeared into the nearby neighborhood, but his escape wasn't clean. Witnesses saw him jumping fences and throwing off his shirt into a trash can. He was sweating, breathing heavily, moving fast. At one point, he stole a bicycle from a porch and pedaled away through side streets. He smoked one of the stolen cigarettes as he hid in a row of bushes. A man who saw him trying to hide attempted to intervene, but Johnson fought him off and kept going. It didn't take long for law enforcement to close in. Just under an hour after the attack, a patrol officer spotted a man matching the suspect's description. Johnson tried to run, but officers gave chase. After a short pursuit on foot, they tackled him to the ground and placed him under arrest. In his pockets, officers found roughly $76 in cash and Nancy Harris's missing ring. At the station, Johnson didn't resist. He confessed to everything: the robbery, the fire, the lighter fluid, the flame. He admitted it all. But he insisted it wasn't what he meant to do. According to his statement, he had been high on drugs and alcohol. He said he never planned to hurt Nancy. The fire, he claimed, was just a scare tactic, a way to intimidate her into handing over the money. He said he only wanted to pour a little fluid and flick the lighter to frighten her, but the flame caught too fast, and once it did, he panicked and left. Despite his explanation, detectives saw no hesitation in the surveillance footage, no attempt to help, no effort to put the fire out. His calm walk out of the store and the candy in his hand told a different story. For investigators, the confession wasn't just words, it was confirmation of what the evidence already showed. Nancy Harris was rushed to Parkland Hospital's burn unit in Dallas. Her condition was critical. Doctors and nurses worked urgently to stabilize her. She had suffered burns on over 40% of her body. According to Dr. John Hunt, a burn specialist, the injuries to her upper body ranged from 2nd to 4th degree. The worst areas had burned through all layers of skin and tissue. Nancy was conscious but unable to speak due to a breathing tube in her throat. Nurses reported that she communicated by spelling words with her fingers. She asked questions. She tried to understand what was happening. At one point she spelled out, "Am I going to die?" The medical team explained the procedures they were using: skin grafts, medications, IV fluids, pain management. They hoped to keep her stable to give her a chance. But Nancy knew the truth. She shook her head when she heard the treatment plan. She didn't want to keep fighting. Her family respected her wishes. Nancy had written a living will years before. It clearly stated that if she were critically injured and unable to recover, she didn't want to be kept alive by artificial means. 5 days after the attack, the treatments were withdrawn. Nancy Harris died from her injuries. She passed away quietly, surrounded by family members who had stood by her side through it all. Nancy lived just a block and a half away from the store. She had worked there for more than 10 years. She was a mother of 4, a grandmother of 11, and a great-grandmother of 7. Her death deeply impacted the local community. Customers who had known her for years brought flowers and handwritten notes. A memorial grew outside the Whip-In convenience store. Her final days were painful, but they were also filled with strength, clarity, and dignity. The trial of Matthew Lee Johnson began in 2013, more than a year after Nancy Harris died. The prosecution presented a clear and powerful case, a robbery turned deadly captured on surveillance footage, supported by eyewitness accounts and Johnson's own confession. He didn't deny what happened. In fact, Johnson took the stand and admitted everything again under oath. He described the night before the attack. He had attended a wedding reception at his brother's house, drank heavily, and left with $30 given to him by a family member. That money was supposed to go toward car repairs. Instead, he used it to buy crack cocaine. According to his own testimony, Johnson smoked several rocks of crack and even sold some to buy more. He stayed awake all night. By 4 a.m., he was still high. Around 5 a.m., he took a Xanax to calm down. Then by 6 a.m., he was back at his brother's house, drinking wine alone on the patio. That's when he said the craving came back. He wanted more crack, but he had no money. So he grabbed a plastic bottle, filled it with lighter fluid, took a cigarette lighter, and left the house. In court, Johnson called himself scum. He said he deserved to die. He told the jury I should be set on fire just like her. But then he asked for mercy. Not for himself, but for his daughters. He had 3 young girls, and he didn't want them to grow up knowing their father was executed by the state. The jury listened, but it wasn't enough. They considered not just what happened that morning, but everything that had come before it. Prosecutors revealed Johnson's criminal history. He had prior convictions for robbery, assault, violating protective orders, and even carjacking. He had once set his girlfriend's rug on fire. In jail, he had threatened officers, exposed himself to a fellow inmate, and attacked a cellmate so severely the man needed staples in his head. This, the prosecution argued, was not a one-time mistake. It was a long pattern of violence. On December 10, 2013, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Matthew Lee Johnson was sentenced to death. On May 20, 2025, exactly 13 years after Nancy Harris was set on fire, Matthew Lee Johnson was brought to the execution chamber inside the Huntsville unit. He had no special last meal. Under Texas law, death row inmates are served the same standard tray as all other prisoners, often a simple meal of meat, vegetables, and bread. Just after 6 p.m., witnesses were seated behind a pane of glass. Among them were members of Nancy Harris's family. They had waited over a decade for this moment. Johnson was led into the chamber, strapped to the gurney and connected to the IV lines. A microphone was positioned above his head for final words. He looked toward the victim's family. "I just ask for y'all's forgiveness," he said. "I never meant to hurt her. I pray she's the first person I see when I open my eyes. I hope to spend eternity with her." He thanked God for giving him 13 years to seek redemption. He turned to fellow inmates, calling them brothers, and told them he loved them. Then he addressed his wife and daughters. "It's nothing you all did. I made bad choices, and now I face the consequences." He ended with a short prayer. "Welcome me, Father." At 6:42 p.m., the lethal drugs began flowing. Johnson gasped several times. He made low, snoring-like sounds. Within 60 seconds, his body stopped moving. At 6:53 p.m., he was pronounced dead. He was 49 years old. Outside the prison, a few protesters stood silently with signs. Across the street, members of the Harris family held hands and wept. For them, the legal process had ended. But the loss never would. In the weeks following Matthew Lee Johnson's execution, the community in Garland, Texas, quietly reflected on the woman whose life had been stolen. Nancy Harris was more than just a victim of a violent crime. She was a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. She had worked at the same convenience store for over 10 years. Many residents remembered her kindness, her sharp wit, and how she greeted customers by name. A permanent memorial was placed at the site of the old Whip-In store. It included a plaque with her name, photos from her life, and handwritten notes from neighbors and grandchildren. Nancy's death sparked conversations about public safety late shift staffing and the vulnerability of elderly workers in small businesses. Some stores in the area changed their policies, ensuring that employees never worked alone, especially during early morning hours. As for Matthew Lee Johnson, his name became a case study in addiction violent escalation and the limits of rehabilitation. Some legal experts debated whether his long history of criminal behavior could have been interrupted earlier with intervention or treatment. But for the Harris family, those discussions offered little comfort. What they lost couldn't be restored. On every May 20th, the family gathers quietly to light a candle and share stories of the woman they called Mom Grandma, or simply Nancy. Her memory endures not just as a victim, but as a reminder of resilience, loss, and the lasting impact of one act of violence.